Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. This two-part series of the Hangar Z podcast was recorded on location in Richmond, Virginia, at the Echo Public Safety Aviation Conference. Host Jon Gray has a roundtable discussion with Terry Miyauchi, Bell's Public Safety Segment Manager, Dave Callen, the owner of SR3 Rescue Concepts, and Andrew Baity, a Virginia State Police helicopter pilot. They share insights on the importance of networking, training, and collaboration among agencies. The conversation highlights the value of fly-ins for fostering relationships and the need for continuous training to ensure safety and efficiency in operations. The guests also address challenges related to funding and the necessity of recurrent training for skill development. This conversation delves into the importance of teamwork and leadership in aviation, emphasizing the need to set aside ego for collective success. It explores how technological advancements are reshaping the industry while highlighting the necessity of maintaining human skills and training. The discussion also touches on the challenges of leadership, the significance of communication, and the evolving landscape of aviation technology. Thank you to our sponsors, Bell, Precision Aviation Group, and Summit Aviation.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, Jon Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
They're advising code 4 on the stop.
Hey, welcome to Hangar Z podcast. I'm your host, Jon Gray, here at Echo Richmond 2024. It's been awesome so far. In the middle of, what is this, the social bar hour right now? You can hear all the folks talking in the background. And a bunch of people walking around having beverages, which we got a few of. Well, for those of us that can, I think Terry's got some water, but that's okay. Honored to be here with everybody. This is a really good event so far. Echo has been a great event. I've actually saw you guys first post about Echo back in, I think, 21. Maybe it's in Fort Myers. And you guys posted something about it being a retreat. I'm like, oh, a retreat? What is this? Like, it really caught my attention. And now it's... it's much bigger than I imagined when it was in 21. It's been a really good event. Great to be here. Fun to sit down with you guys. I just want to talk about your guys' experience so far this year and what you've seen and what we've done. So I guess to do that, we should probably do some introductions first. Sir Terry, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself and what you're currently doing.
Let me first say thanks for the opportunity to talk to the legendary Jon Gray again. It's always an honor. But Terry Miyauchi, so I'm currently the public safety segment manager for Bell Textron, but I come out of the operational field, as you know, started with the U.S. Army in the 80s, started flying in 84, just dated myself, and then did a stint with the Army, worked for a couple of for-profit 135, 133 companies, and then I retired from the Arizona Department of Public Safety. I was last the aviation commander there and been with Bell now for 5 years.
You've had an impressive career, and if you haven't taken it, the leadership class that Terry teaches, it's a must attend. It's a really good class. You talked about your Army background, and I could see Andrew next to you kind of glaring over at you. So, Andrew, can you introduce yourself and let us know about your background and what you're currently doing?
Andrew Baity. I'm currently a civilian or non-sworn pilot with the Virginia State Police Aviation Division. I am an alumni of episode 66 of the Hangar Z podcast, which I understand is the lowest viewed podcast episode to date. I'd spent about 11 years on active duty with the Marine Corps. I'm still a drilling reservist as a Cobra pilot by background, and moved into public safety sector about 3.5 years ago, and that's what I'm doing right now.
You bring up the fact that you're Hangar Z alumni. We're all Hangar Z alumni here. Yeah. You know, there's certain folks that I find myself wanting to bring back on the podcast time and time again, and you all fit that bill. You guys are awesome. You're doing great things in the industry, so it really is an honor to bring you guys back in. We had a different plan for today's conversation, and we had to scrap it because I wanted to add Steve Solis to that recording, and we just couldn't make it happen today. But I didn't want to lose having you all here to talk about some current event stuff. So thank you guys for joining. Dave, we've talked a couple times on the podcast So thanks again for joining us. Can you talk about, a little bit about your background and what you're currently doing?
Like you said, also an alumni. I'm like embarrassed to say I don't remember my episode number, but I'd love to see the stats if you're able to pull them. Because I'm guessing mine aren't that high either. But either way, yeah, it's an honor. Thanks for having us all on here. Yeah, it's always an honor to be involved in what you guys are doing, and I'm loving it. But yeah, Dave Callen. I did a full career with Las Vegas Metro Police and retired as a sergeant out of the air unit there, and did probably, I don't know, about maybe 2/3 of my career out there flying. Flew a lot of patrol and rescues and surveillance and tactical stuff, kind of all the things that you do in law enforcement. Retired in 2020, the owner and one of the flight instructors for SR3 Rescue Concepts. So we're a training company and, basically do kind of all things aviation, specifically to helicopter training. Mostly known for rescue training, but do a lot of other stuff too, firefighting, tactical, things of that nature. But yeah, just full-time doing that stuff now. Having a good time at Echo with hanging out with you guys. So
yeah, I got to see you and Steph do a presentation yesterday at the Virginia State Police facility, which was really cool, talking about cabin rigging and some other stuff. It's funny, again, going back to these different things I go to, you end up seeing the same faces doing similar things, and it's because you're doing good work. That the presentation was great, and seeing you guys out there was awesome. Love what you guys are doing at SR3, really improving the industry as a whole through that.
Appreciate it.
While we're talking about that day at the fleet flying, can you talk about, Andrew, because you planned 99% of what took place yesterday. Can you talk about the concept behind yesterday's flying?
Several months back, Travis Mason from Echo reached out and said, hey, we're having this conference in Richmond. We'd love the Virginia State Police to participate, specifically having an aircraft support the fly-in social hour yesterday that occurred. Went inside for bad weather, but that was the original intent was, hey, we'd like Virginia State Police to play because you guys are there in Richmond. When we kind of looked at what the conference was about, I wasn't familiar with Echo, but we actually had multiple people on staff that had been part of the Fort Myers, had gone down and traveled to it before. We started looking into it and went, hey, maybe there's an interesting opportunity here for more of the law enforcement, public safety sector to come into the space and hang out together. And so for us, I think it was an opportunity, kind of multifaceted, to A, get some great instruction, but B, do the networking of kind of strengthening those mid-Atlantic partnerships. And I was so grateful that we had such dramatic interest from every level that you could want, local, state, federal, military, and it just kind of grew from there. And in the end, I think it turned out pretty good. Despite a hurricane and some IFR weather, we still had 10 aircraft, and we had 20 agencies plus participate. Hopefully, a lot of people had a good time and had some good takeaways out of it.
Yeah, it was really cool. The training was great. The demonstrations you did at the end were really cool. I've been to quite a few fly-ins, and I haven't been to a fly-in where they've included demonstrations from the local agencies. So that was a great addition to the overall thing. So good job on that. They talk about the importance of these fly-ins and how they draw people. And I think a lot of people's fear is I might invite these people to come and nobody's going to show up. Can you talk about your experience with how people responded to your initial invite to come, just as encouragement for the folks that maybe want to do it but aren't sure what the turnout's going to be like?
I will admit that interest was tepid at best initially when it went out. The whole, planning process, if you've ever seen The Office, when Dwight's talking about fire safety and he's like, PowerPoint is boring, Today smoking saves lives. Well, that's kind of the point of the fly-in was we wanted to invite people to an event that they felt they could participate in, that it wasn't just coming for the purpose of getting academic instruction, that it was multifaceted, that they had great instruction, but they also had an opportunity to interact with vendors that they felt were important in their space, and that they had an opportunity to see demonstrations and see what we're doing right as an agency. And as you saw, it wasn't just the aircraft. We had our special operations team there. We had BCI, the arson and bomb guys were there. We had K9 there. Motors were there. What I talked about in my episode with the state police is that we are so multifaceted and we are a supporting entity for everybody else, right? We fill gaps that local law enforcement are unable to fill. It's cool to highlight that. And so that was kind of the whole big point of the fly-in, was trying to create a space that was cool, that there was prac app, that there was hands-on, that you could see. And that's why, the aircraft rigging, the original goal was to get around the aircraft and kind of talk about what a snag-free interior looked like. The response was overwhelming to the point that we just couldn't get around one aircraft, even as big as a 412 is. So that's kind of how it came about.
I think that the instruction is to me the headliner. If you have good instruction like from SR3 or tactical flying, you bring in Jack Shanley or Clay Lacey, somebody like that, it draws people automatically. So the good training is the key component in my opinion. I think it's great that you brought in SR3. That again to me is the anchor, and then the demonstration stuff is a great component to that as well. Terry, you've been to a bunch of fly-ins in the past. What do you see that's successful in most of the fly-ins that you've been to that have been successful?
John, I think you hit it with the training. It's at the baseline. It's the core that is the draw. But then on top of that is that networking component. And it's not just a social networking. I think there's a great value in these regional agencies coming together and developing a deeper relationship and learning how each other works and see how they operate. Because when you do have that big event where you're supporting each other, that type of networking becomes invaluable.
Yeah.
So that to me is a key component as well.
I think about Florida and the southeastern portion of the U.S. It's affected by the hurricane, Helene or Helen, however you want to say it, that just came through. I think it illustrates the need to be aware of the capabilities of your neighbors, because you're going to need their help with something like that takes place. But for you guys in Vegas, I feel like you might have been on an island sometimes. Not a whole lot of resources around the city of Vegas. So how did you guys prepare and plan for stuff like that?
Thanks to our sponsor, Summit Aviation, a full-service provider for business, government, parapublic, and military aviation, specializing in maintenance, modifications, avionics, interiors, and paint. Discover more at summit-aviation.com.
That's a good question. And I mean, to everybody's point, that the time to do that is before it happens, not when it's happening or after it happens. So you look at any type of a mass event like that, and like right now, it's actually 1 October. It's the anniversary of the 1 October mass shooting that we had down there. So something that's just unprecedented like that, where nobody even really thought that we would have to deal with something of that size. And the hurricane and the places that it came through that it don't traditionally see that type of weather come through, same thing. So maybe a lot of those agencies hadn't planned for it or never thought that they would have to plan for it. But to answer your question, for us in Vegas, a little bit isolated, but you do kind of have to do what you mentioned and at least know and understand what are all the capabilities of your neighbors, all the other agencies that are around you or that are at least close enough to respond. And for us, a lot of, the big assistance would come from Southern California organizations, and they're always willing to come out. But, if you don't have those connections, if you haven't gone to a conference or a fly-in and you haven't, networked and met people and, had conversations and gotten emails and phone numbers and, potentially maybe even done something like a fly-in where, we're going to go to Riverside here, down the road here and do their fly-in. So, there's an opportunity for even bordering states to cross border and make those connections. So that was for us in Vegas specifically, our kind of on an island and really the only aviation asset outside of maybe, the Air Force there at Nellis. Even just like the local county and city fire departments, hey, what are their swift water rescue teams, that are not aviation related able to do? And, if there's an ability for us to cross train with those folks and insert them and maybe move their people and, deal with larger events like that. But, I think the point is you need to do it before it happens and not, during or after, because it's just too late.
Yeah. I think about comms plans, and those are always the most difficult part of any operation is how do we effectively communicate between different agencies and different counties, and in your case, a different state. So I think thinking through those things in advance is really important, because when it's happening is the last time you want to be trying to figure out what frequencies are compatible with the next agency over. For you, is that something that you saw as a net benefit as a result of the training you put on yesterday? At least getting these conversations started, knowing who these folks are, and maybe, down the road coming up with a comms plan, or is that something you've already got?
I think we're fortunate here that we do put on exercises with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and that helps with this large-scale response. The Coast Guard comes up from Elizabeth City. We have our National Guard guys out of Sandston. So we participate in an exercise, at least annually, that allows us to go, hey, this is the plan moving forward. And there are those kind of compacts and constructs made so that everybody's kind of on the same sheet of music moving forward. It gets interesting when you start crossing the border. And for us, one of those interesting things kind of came with our hospital rescue in Unicoi, Tennessee. And that's an interesting thing because it's a relationship that really affected that rescue. So for context, we went down to rescue a bunch of people that were stranded on the top of a hospital down near Irwin, Tennessee. And it's because the hospital, it's a Ballad Health hospital. Ballad Health is the partner in our MedFlight 2 program. And so they called because they knew that asset is there. They knew that asset's 20 minutes away and that we were ready, able, and willing to go to accept that tasking. Now it's in Tennessee, and we're the Virginia State Police, but it's the relationships that allowed that to occur, at least in my opinion. And it's kind of the same thing. We actually went up to Maryland for a SARX the last year and just, again, developed those relationships with the Maryland State Police to go, hey, if there is an event in the Chesapeake, how would we thread into that? What can we offer in terms of support? And kind of helped answer some of those questions. So yes, there are some basic, I would say, game plans that are outlined for how we would do things. But a lot of times, I've used this term a few times over the last couple of days, it's improv theater, that you're taking that foundational baseline and you're pivoting. And it's just all about flexibility. But flexibility really involves having the relationships to know who to turn to when you do need to be flexible.
With your response to Tennessee, had you guys responded to that area for assistance before?
Yeah, and when you kind of look at where MedFlight 2 is in Abington, Virginia, it's kind of an interesting intersection because they're down in the southwest portion of the state, pretty close to Bristol, Tennessee, which puts them running calls for service routinely into North Carolina. In fact, the level 1 trauma center they run into is Johnson City, Tennessee. That's where they take most of the patients. So they are there at the intersection of North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And they'll run in, as far as to Pikeville, Kentucky if they need to. So it is one of those things that, over the years, I feel like we've developed pretty good relationships with the surrounding areas because, hey, we fill kind of that, that void in that area for coverage. And the same thing, we're willing to push north and south in Richmond to service areas that are maybe traditionally supported by somebody else when we need to backfill.
It's interesting because when I talk about understanding your neighbor's abilities, I'm thinking of it from like a city standpoint or a county standpoint, but you and Terry both operating on the state level. So for you, Terry, in the state of Arizona, how did you as a supervisor and as the commander of the unit come to understand the capabilities of your partners and what that look like for you?
Really the same thing that Andrew described and what we talked about with the fly-in. It starts off with that relationship, where you know the name, you know the phone number, and you know who to call when you need them. And that morphs into the operational technical aspect where it's not just knowing the frequency, it's knowing the ins and outs of that frequency. I'll back up here a second. I already dated myself from the 80s. I don't think I can remember a live event or an exercise event, whether it be the military or the firefighting or the police, or even as a bell rep now, where the debrief did not include comms, minimally as a talking point, normally as a challenge point, something we need to fix type thing. Yeah. It's always there, right? So yeah, you have to know the neighbors. You have to know those challenges. So how do we do that at the state, to answer your question? In Arizona DPS, we supported all the police or the public safety agencies within the state and sometimes surrounding states. So that meant we were operating on UHF, VHF, 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz, encrypted, non-encrypted, and one component of that is technology. You may not have the bandwidth or the band that you need to communicate with them. So there's a technical component. And then to me, there's that relationship or that operational component. And it's not just something you do on paper. You don't just program those 300 frequencies into your system. You go out and you exercise them. You see if they actually work. And every time we did that, like I'm sure these gentlemen did as well, you find the holes in it.
Sure.
It's like, oh, actually entered that one wrong. Or, oh, that's actually no longer active. And as Dave says, the time to do that is before the hurricane hits or before that support need hits. That's critical to the success of any of those missions, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember getting our radios reprogrammed, and to your point, we thought we had a frequency in there, which we did, but it was off by a decimal.
Yeah,
and we go and try and use the system and that frequency, and didn't work.
right.
So thank God it was during a test and not during an actual incident. But I think a lot of times it happens in an incident, because you don't realize what you're missing. Do you guys have experiences with anything similar to that, or have you seen that with your travels with SR3?
Yeah, we have. And, I think not only do you find that maybe a frequency is not in there correctly, but what I've seen more of anything is that because it's not done frequently enough, you pull somebody aside and you say, hey, aside from cycling through your normal patrol channels, this radio now has to be put in a different mode, or something that's non-standard has to be done. And they just don't remember how to do it.
Yeah.
And you picture, hey, you just got this call, you're going to have to go assist in a massive voice rescue situation because of flooding or whatever. And now, the co-pilot, 2FO, whoever is now tasked with, well, hey, I need to change into this different mode and pick these up, and now talking it, through a trunk system or something, that they just never do it. And again, that's not the time to realize,
right.
I don't know how to work this radio. So yeah, it's all about getting ahead of it. But yeah, I'd say we've seen more of that, just unfamiliarity and not frequent enough use and training of the gear itself to actually use it. And that's even worse. If you have it and the capability is there, but then you can't use it.
Yeah.
That's a tragedy at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes to our technology in general. I remember Nick Meeks talking about the camera systems being similar to a cell phone today. They have the capabilities of an iPhone, but we use it like a fax machine. We touch or scratch the surface of the true capabilities of these camera systems because we don't understand what they're capable of in the the overall picture of things. And I think the radio systems are very similar. We're all very good at the same 5 bands that we use all the time, but you get in some different mode that's required to talk to another agency that you don't ever talk to. And you're like, well, how do I do that? So those are things that are critically important to understand, or at least understand how to get the resource you need to figure that out. If it's not committed to memory, maybe you can have an iPad or even on your iPhone, some instructions on accessing these different modes or communicating with these different frequencies. So I think that's critically important. Going back to you and your experience yesterday at the fly-in, there was a lot of agencies that I've never interacted with. The New York State Police it was cool to see them. The New Jersey folks. Can you talk about some of those new relationships, if they're new, that came as a result of that training and the benefit that'll bring to you guys as an agency?
Absolutely. I think it's important to note that, everybody views the world through the lens of their own experience. I'm a military guy by background, and so that's kind of what I bring that I don't want to call it special to the state police, but is unique to me. One of my colleagues is former 10th Mountain pilot, so he was up in New York, and he's actually the guy that got New York down here because he's got counterparts that are there now, and I was so grateful that they were willing to fly down to do that. So, some of these are just, you have different people across your organization that have these relationships that you can leverage, and, you're introducing them to a greater audience now. And so I think that's kind of what happened is, he had a relationship with one guy in New York, and now we all kind of have a relationship with a bunch of guys in New York, and that's wonderful. And you can start kind of doing those best practices. And that's what I love, right? It's always it's the best idea wins, and I love talking to another organization and figuring out, hey man, what makes you guys tick? Why do you do it the way that you do it? How am I doing it? Do I need to reevaluate how I'm doing it? So, yesterday, great relationships were developed. We were talking to the Coast Guard out of Elizabeth City. Hey, do you guys want to come down and potentially learn about hoisting to small boats? And we can get you up, and we can give you a different look. And I went, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I would talk to the DC Guard guys, and there's, state and federal integration there. You go, hey, that's cool. That's new stuff. And then you kind of strengthen some of the partnerships that we already do have, right? I know Andrew Edgerton came on the podcast. Great dude. I mean, he has been such a wonderful person to turn to and go, hey, man, you guys run LE at a great level, right? And he's been so gracious to open the doors and go, hey, man, anytime you want to send somebody up here and do ride-alongs and work shot over and see what it's about, or see, because they're running those density of calls, it's really great for us. So yesterday, I think that there were a lot of great relationships that were either initially formed or strengthened, and it just comes as a result of getting together. It's always good to go through email and text, and that's nice. But it is much better to I think break bread and sit down and have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think from a leadership perspective, and Terry, I'll shift to you, and then Dave, to you on this. I think about putting the request in to a supervisor, say, we want to go to this other jurisdiction who maybe not that close to where we are, having to sell the value and benefits of doing that. Having been the commander of the state program, what are your recommendations for folks on submitting those requests and explaining the values to somebody who maybe not, who doesn't see the value that we do in these types of training?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
It's typically, John, I think, an education. I mean, if it was as easy as, hey, we need to go to this fly-in for this reason, 9 out of 10 of those approvers are probably going to say no. But it's a legitimate need. It's operationally justified from operational efficiency to safety. So it's an education. And it's really just the things we're talking about right here. And when that understanding happens, then those approvals do happen. It's interesting because I've watched over the last few years, there's more and more fly-ins and there's more and more participation. So I think as agencies, we're doing a great job with that education. And I think we're seeing the impact or the result of that as well. And I think that plays into it.
I think for you see the training requests, approvals, denials coming through based on the training you're providing. So what are you seeing that's successful that agencies are doing to get the approvals or not that are coming through to you?
It's tough. I mean, to be honest, the elephant in the room, it's usually funding is the issue, and some organizations are much more well-funded than others. Some of them have means to maybe, pull in grant money or things like that, access to foundations or things, but it can be a challenge. That's usually the biggest roadblock. As far as, who's doing it and who won't and for why, it's interesting because I've seen very large, well-funded organizations that have asked for training proposals and requests and things of that nature, and then they just don't get approved. And then we've seen agencies that are much, much smaller and not as well-funded, but they're much more well-supported, I think, by their administration and their staff. And they appreciate exactly what, we were just talking about, where, they see the value in it and they understand that it's going to make their organization and their people much safer. And that's going to translate into the service that they provide to their citizens. So I think it just has to do with understanding, the value in it. And then really from the leadership, sometimes, let's be honest, if you promote or, whether it's in law enforcement, military or management in a civilian company, you need to be willing to kind of go to bat and fight sometimes. It feels like sometimes that's all you do, but a good leader is going to be willing to take that extra mile. And if you're in a law enforcement organization, you're trying to get training and funding is an issue, but you need it. A good leader is going to basically go and take as much effort as possible to take that to your bosses and explain why we need it. It's not a waste of money, the value in it, and fight for it. And sometimes you just have to fight for it. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but, it's always been interesting to me to see, wow, we might get a request from one of the 10th biggest agencies in the nation, and they're like, we can't do it. We just don't have funding.
Yeah.
And then some of the smaller ones will, but yeah, it's kind of hit or miss sometimes.
So what I'd add to that is it's about reframing training as not a one and done. And I think that, if you kind of view training like health, that if you go into the gym and you pick up a weight once, like you're not any healthier. And so it's about establishing recurrent training for advanced skill development. And then everything in between that is just doing the blocking and tackling to maintain currency and proficiency. And then you bring in, a vendor that can do it at a very high level and take you, whether that's emergency procedure training, the stuff that we do to bring in, the OEM to make sure that, hey, yep, we're performing the aircraft we're hitting all the emergency procedures and the limitations and operating limitations of the aircraft, but also from a mission skill development, that health is one of those things that it has to be done over and over and over and over to be done safely and efficiently. And I think too often you'll see, whether that's the military or in the public safety sector, that, well, we brought somebody in once. It's like, cool, man.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago.
That's not enough to sustain.
Right.
And I think that there has been somewhat of a mindset shift that, at least, I've seen in my brief stint in public safety, that there is more willingness to do it and hit it, recognizing the compounding effects over time.
Yeah. I think that's an important point to bring up, the need for recurrency. Like you said, the one time isn't enough, because folks promote, they cycle out to other assignments and details. Unfortunately, you want them to stay in the same place forever, but they typically don't. In law enforcement, they're going all kinds of places. Aviation might be the one place that doesn't happen as often, but it still does through promotions and other types of things. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Are you seeing through SR3 that recurrence happening on a frequent level, or are you seeing kind of what he's talking about with they can fund it initially, but are having a hard time bringing you guys back for that recurrency?
We see both, and I mean that's spot on what you said, and it's tough because the other thing is too, you can't track the accidents you never had, and so a lot of people just grow comfortable and they think, well, we've never had an accident. Why do we need more training? So, to your point, it's interesting. We actually were just contacted by an agency that is fighting right now to get annual recurrent training, and they said, hey, can you give us some stuff that I can use, when I go into my management meeting, because it's not required regulatory for, hoisting or things like that. There's some, 133 regulations, but for public use, there's no minimum requirements. It says you have to do recurrent training. It's, it's best practice, but, it's interesting because we were just approached by a law enforcement agency that's saying, hey, can you give us kind of some stuff to help support our claim as to this? But yeah, again, it's wide variety. And that was one of the questions we were asked is, out of all of our clients, how many of them are annual recurrent training customers? And a good deal of them are, but then some of them are that kind of one and done.
Yeah.
But I agree to your point, that it's one of those things that if you are investing in it and you're training, all the time, your likelihood of having an accident goes down tremendously. And even, talking about going to Bell for emergency procedures training, may fly my whole career and never have an EP, never have a flame out or a hydraulic FADEC failure or whatever. But the one time I do, if I'm able to save myself, the crew, damage to property, people on the ground, because I went to Bell once a year and got really good training from these folks, I mean, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah. That's coming from somebody who's had two emergency procedures you had to execute.
Right. But I mean, I'm still here just because of all the training that I received over the years from everybody, from Bell, from, all the MD guys, like literally everybody. I mean, you put that into one big ball of just experience, and that's not me. That's all of those people that poured into me, and that's, to me, it's a no brainer, but it can be a tough sell.
Yeah.
John, I think there's a political, to tie back to your leadership question, I think there's a political component to that too. I mean, it's typically an aviation manager requesting or educating a non-aviation commander. And there's that aviation, non-aviation bridge that has to be crossed. And it's not just an education. It has to be done with a political savviness. Those large agencies that Dave talked about, you need both of those. And you can't just, the guy that goes up there and says, okay, boss, we need this or else, it's not going to happen. And there's that knowing how to ask, when to ask, and how to navigate that system that creates that success. And it's not just with the training and these flying events and education and recurrent training. It's with every aspect of the operation and the budget, really.
Yeah.
So
you bring up the political side, and it also kind of reminds me of the cultural side of some agencies. Some agencies, to your point, are like, we've never had an accident. We've never lost an air crew. These things have never happened. So why do we need to spend more money on training? And it goes to the mindset of you do what you do because it's what you've always done. And to your guys' thing, you're saying you don't know what you don't know. So how do you get an agency out of that mindset? Well, we don't need to change because there's nothing wrong. How do you tackle that?
I think there's a number of ways. I think I'll give you an example. One of the most effective ways, speak the language. So these guys are replacing patrol cars because new technology comes out. They're replacing weapons. They're replacing all kinds of police equipment because of technology efficiencies and et cetera, et cetera. Aviation is no different. I literally saw a presentation once where they showed a picture of an old patrol car and today's patrol car for that specific agency. They showed the old wheel gun, then they showed the automatic gun. They showed the old helicopter, and then they showed the old helicopter. And it's like, hey, guys, your most expensive, most highest liability piece of equipment, you've kind of neglected. And so that education, and that, again, takes that political savviness to navigate those waters. And the challenging part about it is that guy you're educating today is probably going to be reassigned, and you're going to be educating a different guy in the next 1 to 3 years, probably.
That is such a big problem.
It's an ongoing point.
You see that all the time, I'm sure.
We do, and that, I mean, I lived that in my agency. You know, our captain was replaced about every 2 years, and right around that time, he had a good understanding of what the unit did, what air support and SAR did, and you know why we did everything. And then it was time to move on, and then the process repeated itself with our lieutenant as well, our section commander. So that's always been a big roadblock in police departments, especially fire departments too. But you know, law enforcement is law enforcement. You know, we're kind of set in our ways, and we have a certain type of a mindset. But it is such a different industry than just aviation. And so I think we can all agree that that's always been a challenge, and it always continue to will be when you try to blend these two things, and then you have somebody that's an administrator or a leader that does not have any aviation experience, and you're trying to, exactly what you said, you're trying to explain and justify why is this so important? And then their question is always, why is this so expensive? Everything in aviation, it's so expensive. But
right.
Yeah, that's so common. I'm sure, you know, Andrew, you guys probably see that too. It's just because the operational folks stay in the unit, but the people that promote tend to move on, you know, and you're lucky if you get an aircraft commander or a section commander that has that experience, that's priceless to your unit.
You know, I think one of the more interesting things coming in and trying to learn the language, to your point, is there's not like a user's guide for how state procurement works. There's like a person that understands this highly convoluted process. And there may be only one or two of those people in your agency. And so I can tell you as kind of a line pilot going, all right, this is what I want. And this is why I think we need it. And this is the argument that I'm trying to articulate. All right, now I'm going to send it to a money person.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
What's the process here? And it's just unbelievably complicated. I remember, you know, in the military, when I was going through professional military education, they gave a class on acquisitions, and you go, this is the horse blanket. This is how acquisitions works. And an hour and a half later in the lecture, you're more confused than when you started. And it sometimes feels like that. So, you know, I think learning the language, not just of what you're trying to convey to a non-aviation, you know, upper management, but is also a sworn law enforcement officer. So there is the commonality. The background there is going, okay, hey, I'm trying to articulate why having 46 zones in my radio is important. Well, comm shop, because I have a helicopter that transitions through 7 different divisions throughout the state, that rotates through 3 bases, that is not also talking on these state tactical frequencies, but mutual aid and interoperability frequencies. And this is why I need this. And so when you explain that to them in the language of their language, then you seem to see those results. So it's sometimes taking some really highly complicated, convoluted processes and trying to distill it. And when you come into it, like I said, there's no guidebook. And so it comes down sometimes to just that mentorship of a guy knowing how to do it before you to explain it, and then try to put that in some desktop procedures that there is at least turnover when they leave that billet. So
yeah, I think we talked about the importance of relationships before. And in my agency, Eric Widener was a sergeant when I went to aviation. He did a really good job of building the network of relationships downtown in finance. So they understood our mission and why these things were important. And I think that was a benefit for us. And given we were a smaller size city, so that was easier for us to do. Whereas I see the state agency, it's almost impossible probably to figure out where this state person lies and how to get them to buy into what you're doing.
This is probably going to be unusual but there's a relationship development that needs to happen there as well with that procurement manager or with that procurement team. My former life, this is unusual, but we were able to get an embedded procurement manager within the aviation unit. We had the staffing exercise, what's your critical staffing needs? And everyone expected me to say pilots, TFOs, paramedics, mechanics. I said, I need a procurement manager embedded. It's literally the thing that is slowing us down. It's my biggest headache. It's my biggest time consumer. It's what will help us the most. And we did that. And there's a story that goes with that, but that relationship that develops, that education that helps. And then we had common goals to get those things done. It's a difficult landscape to navigate. I'm not saying it's not, but it is a challenge. Aviation, you mentioned, Dave, it's expensive. It's even more expensive when we don't do it right.
Yeah.
And when you take that education, that political savviness, to me, there's also there's a storytelling component maybe that goes there. And sometimes I think we actually get it backwards, where we promote our successes. Well, if you think about it from a political standpoint, these politicians really that we're trying to convince we need more money or we need more approvals for this or that. If something's going well, they have nothing to fix. When something's broken that maybe is going to embarrass them or cost them money, that gives them something to fix. It gives them motivation to fix. So it's not just hey, look at this great mission we did. It's, hey, just so you're aware, we got this request to pull these, victims out of this area. We couldn't do it because of these reasons. Giving you a heads up so it doesn't, backfire on you. What are you talking about? Why couldn't you do that? Well, they now have something to fix and morph that into, whether that's equipment or training or whatever that reason is. There's to me, it's a critical part of that aviation management or that aviation leadership.
Well, that's, it's an interesting thing. There was a great paper published by the Army War College called Lying to Ourselves, a Profession of Dishonesty. And it's about the fact that you have all these requirements that are outlined throughout the year. And if you stack them all together, there is more requirements than there is time to do those requirements. So people start gun decking the requirements and doing false reporting because nobody wants to be the guy left holding the bag going, well, I didn't do this annual training. My box is red. And so all the boxes are green. And so where I go with that is I feel like there has to be a culture that allows it to be acceptable that you can not be able to fulfill something. If I come back and I say, hey, I can't meet my hoist rescue mission right now because I do not have enough serviceable hoists, that they go, well, that's unacceptable. Yeah. You have to.
Right.
Well, hey, man, I cannot do this in-house. It is just something that cannot be done by me. And so you have that supportive upper echelon to go, understood. How can we help resource you to success in this specific thing? And the other thing is, I'm going to steal a Nick Minks here.
These are good conversations, though, honestly, guys. Really, really good input from both of you.
Thanks.
Spot on as well, I think, quite honestly. The challenges are, doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter, and you probably experienced this traveling, outside of the United States. It's funny, the languages can change, but the problems remain the same.
I get a visit around the world, and the common things are we all want to enhance public safety. We want to save lives, save limbs, save property. That's common around the world, no matter who you visit. The second most common thing is the politics and the budget. It's always in the way of trying to do just that. And everywhere you go, it's the same complaint in that we don't have the budget to do that. The commander won't let us do that, and it's frustrating.
It is.
It's funny because, John talked about Flight Suit Friday, and it's a Coast Guard podcast, but it was designed to, it accepts that aviation is a tribal story, that if you kind of go back to aviators with leather skull caps and scarves, like telling each other the stories on the bar stools, well, they're trying to take a modern age approach to that and capture some of those stories and archive them. And I think that, when you look at, okay, it should be as easy in black and white to go, the cost of an accident is always higher than the cost of doing training. And if it was that easy and you go, it's going to be X number of millions of dollars that you're going to pay out in settlement or a lawsuit, but you could pay $10,000 or $15,000 for training and we could sustain that over time. then it would be that easy. It should be that black and white. But I feel like institutionally over time, those lessons are lost. The tribal stories get lost, or they forget, or it dims. And so you see in a lot of agencies, right, they have an accident and there's a huge knee-jerk reaction. There's going to be this big momentum for change. And then 5 years down the line, that fades and people forget. And so, John, to bring you back up to speed, I was talking about Flight Suit Friday, trying to capture these tribal stories and archive them so that people can have these lessons over time. And I think that's what's so important, is where I was going with Nick Minks, is he talks about some of the most successful agencies are the ones that have really robust activity tracking systems. And I've seen that over time. It's the importance of data that, in the Marine Corps, when we have an accident, an ASO, they go in and investigate. We publish the report. That report is accessible by all of the other aviation safety officers. So we can go, hey, who's had this type of incident? All right, I'm gonna look it up. There it is. Okay, these are the lessons learned. And I can go through on a quarterly basis and go, hey, we're gonna do a review of this safety investigation report, just to kind of hit it and talk about the things that happen out there, to go, okay, we talked about the risk controls that we implemented. They were unsuccessful. All right, so now looking at the composite of incidents like this, maybe we're going to try a different approach to it. So I think that, it's a tribal story, and you have to make sure that that is getting passed down and that it is also embedded in everybody's institutional memory. And I'll give you an example, at least from my own experience. I was part of a squadron that lost a UH-1Y on the way to 29 Palms in January of 2015. And really tragic backstory there, but it was due in part to a misunderstanding of some systems knowledge. And I can tell you that I was so proud to see by 2018, when I was an instructor pilot teaching people to fly the Cobra and the Huey, that is a discuss item when it comes to that particular system, which was the main rotor gearbox. So every single student that passed through the FRS that learned about the Huey and Cobra gearbox, they learned about this particular instance, and they learned about why this knowledge is important. And it still persists to this day, right? And I think that is the best way that we can sometimes honor these people's legacies, to go, hey, it's not in vain. We always say in the Navy, Marine Corps, community, that the NATOPS, our operating procedures, are written in blood. And I feel like sometimes, hey, with training, when you're trying to sell it, it should be black and white. It should be that easy, but it's not. And it's because people it fades from memory, and they're on to the next thing. And then it's an uphill. You're just like Sisyphus pushing the ball uphill, trying to sell something.
Well, public safety, like we talked about, you've got folks that are retiring. They're leaving units for other assignments. So there is constant change. And if you don't make an effort to institutionalize some of that stuff, it does get lost, and I think part of our goal through the podcast in telling some of these stories and memorializing this stuff is to help combat that a little bit, because I do think that's a huge deal. People just forget, you might pay attention to a certain topic for 5 or 10 years, then all of a sudden you've not had any problems with that particular topic, so it falls off the radar and it gets buried, For you guys in Arizona, how did you kind of deal with that and combat that idea?
That it's that institutional knowledge. I mean, what comes to mind to me is the Vietnam era pilot, right? And they're largely retired at this point, and there is a plethora of knowledge and experiences that we all benefited from. Are we forgetting that, or are we still carrying that on? Well, there was generations after that as well that we also carry forward. I'll give you a couple examples. We John, you know this. We had a couple unfortunate incidents in Arizona there. One was 11 years ago, and we memorialize that every year still with a hike to the spot of the accident, and we tell the story. And we tell the story for, so that we'll never forget. Another one was all the way back in 1976, and we don't tell that story like we probably should, if that makes sense. So I'm saying we're not perfect in that regard. I don't think any of us are, but I could not agree more with Andrew that those past experiences we learned from. I think Brian Smith, who's a great safety advocate, his saying is we're not crashing new ways. We're not figuring out new ways to crash helicopters. We're just not learning from those old. I totally butchered his statement, but I think you get the point with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll tell Brian you said that.
Yeah.
Well, I know that resonates with you and the whole founding SR3. Can you tell us the story of that and how exactly what we're talking about is linked to the mission that you guys have at SR3?
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Thanks to our sponsor, Summit Aviation, a full-service provider for business, government, parapublic, and military aviation, specializing in maintenance, modifications, avionics, interiors, and paint. Discover more at summit-aviation.com.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast, recorded live at the Echo Public Safety Aviation Conference in Richmond, Virginia. We want to extend our heartfelt thanks to our guests Terry Miyauchi, Dave Callen, and Andrew Baity for sharing their invaluable insights into the world of public safety aviation. Throughout our conversation, we explored the critical importance of networking, training, and collaboration among agencies, especially in times of emergency. The discussions on building relationships through fly-ins and the pressing need for continuous training truly underscore the foundation of safety and operational efficiency in our field. We addressed the challenges of funding and the significance of recurrent training, emphasizing that continuous education and a culture of accountability are essential for enhancing public safety efforts. Leadership development and setting egos aside are key to fostering a supportive and growth-oriented environment in aviation. As technology continues to reshape our industry, let's not forget the human element. Communication, teamwork, and skill maintenance are just as crucial. We encourage you to take these insights back to your teams and communities, fostering collaboration and continuous improvement. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next episode, where we'll continue to explore the evolving landscape of public safety aviation. Safe flying, and see you next time. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.